Welcome to Cyber Dialogues, brought to you by Palo Alto Networks. This series is your go-to resource for understanding the latest trends in enterprise cybersecurity and gaining actionable insights that you can use to help secure your organisation with confidence. I'm your host, Brad Howarth. In today's program, I've got a very special guest, the Global CFO for Palo Alto Networks, Mr. Dipak Golechha. Dipak brings a wealth of experience across finance and operational roles in a multitude of industries, spanning education, fast-moving consumer goods and more, and brings a unique insight into the rare intersection between finance and cybersecurity. In today's episode, we'll be examining the critical relationship between cyber and finance professionals. We'll look at the things that CFOs need to understand about their organisation's cybersecurity posture. We'll investigate the metrics that matter most, and we'll look at how cybercrime is reshaping the role of the finance professional. Dipak, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you've had a very interesting career as a finance professional. You've worked across a number of different industries, including fast-moving consumer goods. And what were the skills that you found that you could apply directly into the cybersecurity space? And what were some of the things that you really had to focus on learning in order to bring yourself up to speed?
Well, I think, let me start with the learning part. It's a different language, right? I actually remember having to Google what does ARR mean, because everybody was talking in ARR terms, and so it's a pretty steep learning curve on that. But once you get through it, what you realize is that in the world of FMCG, you have maybe 15, 20 different metrics that you have to be all over. It's difficult to do that on a day-by-day basis, so you have to create systems and processes. I grew up at Procter & Gamble, which is a promote from within company, so you spend a lot of time on people development and trying to train your successors and things like that. And so what you learn is, learn the industry that you're in, and then pick the things that you think will help that industry grow even further, and then build the processes and systems that you've seen at scale in FMCG for technology.
Now, in a lot of organisations, we'll see that the risk function and the finance function are very close. In some cases, it's actually under the custodianship of the same person. From your own perspective then, what were the skills that you built up in risk that proved to be most beneficial when looking at the cyber risk that organisations face?
Look, I think risk as a general topic is one that every company has to take. You can't be completely risk-free, otherwise you'll never be able to get a return on investment or progress. So I think the key is to have calculated risk. That's often why the CFO is also the chief risk officer, or at least heads up the enterprise risk management world. And look, I think what you do is you look at the data, you try objectively to understand where are the risks, and so you just make sure that you understand them, and then you create the right protocols to mitigate them, like multi-factor authentication or training for all of your employees to ensure they understand what risk they're taking by not following your right protocols.
So what are the aspects of cybersecurity that you think are most important to a CFO?
I think understanding what level of risk you have relative to your business. If you're a data business, a credit card company or something like that, then everybody's records are critical to your business model. You should be paranoid about it. You should make sure that it's under lock and key, and that's absolutely critical. There are other industries where the data may not be the most critical element for the overall company, but you need to adapt for it. Ultimately, cybersecurity is all about securing the digital way of life. So it depends how digital you've become as a company and how much that drives your entire business plan.
So to what extent then do you think that a CFO should become engaged in understanding the cybersecurity strategy, specifically from the perspective of understanding the value or the cost of a cybersecurity strategy?
Well, I think every company in the world is becoming more and more digital, right? I think it starts off with that, and every company in the world is getting more and more data-based, which also goes into digital. So I think, I say this in a lot of CFO forums, but cybersecurity is the next existential threat for every company. It's just a question of when. In your life cycle, is that going to be the thing that you need to look at? But I haven't yet met a CFO that doesn't understand the risk that's out there of a cybersecurity attack. I don't think the CFO community yet fully knows what questions to ask to be able to understand the risk objectively.
So one of the questions I often get asked is how much money is enough to spend when it comes to cybersecurity? I don't think it's a particularly easy question to answer, but is there an equation or a set of principles that a CFO should keep in mind when it comes to ensuring that they are spending at an adequate level to protect their organisation?
Yeah, so there are some benchmarks. We often talk about 5 to 10% of your IT budget, maybe the right general level, just to make sure that you're not an outlier in terms of what's going on. I think it really does depend on what exactly are you trying to do with your data. Like if you're a company that has a small amount of data that you're really paranoid about, that you think are the crown jewels of the company, then you want to spend whatever you need to do to protect that data. If there's other data that you're not so concerned about, like the emails going back and forth, then you still have to spend some, but you don't spend as much. So I think there are some benchmarks that you can use to just make sure that you're not completely out of whack. But then I think it's having the conversation with your CISO and just determining what's your risk tolerance for different data sets and making sure you have a data segregation strategy. That's actually what I see a lot of companies not really following through on, is what are my crown jewels? Like, how do I want to protect them?
To what extent then do you think that a CFO should become engaged in understanding the difference between different providers who are out in the marketplace?
Look, I think it's critical if you really want to understand this risk at scale. There's a lot of companies that are out there. The history of cybersecurity has really been, it's an IT vendor strategy, and cybersecurity was another cost, like every other cost in IT. Probably the size and scale didn't warrant the CFO to get too involved too quickly. Today, it's a very different world. It's an existential threat to almost every company. It's a much more significant spend pool as well. And the quality of cybersecurity requires you to actually understand the market a lot better. And so you do have to dig in if you want to have an objective view. Otherwise, most companies have a legacy cybersecurity system that's often 30, 40, 50 vendors, if you're talking about large enterprises.
So at the end of the day, most cyber criminals are after money, so therefore it probably makes sense that they should be going after the finance function directly. What impact do you think cybercrime therefore is having on the operations of a finance team today, and how might that change into the future?
Yeah, so interestingly, Brad, actually finances are not typically the first thing that cyber criminals go after. They usually go after, like, health records are probably even more valuable than financial records. And part of the reason for that is every financial transaction happens through a paywall, which has very, very high security already. If you're with Visa, MasterCard, or any of these financial services companies, they have very strong cybersecurity with backups and zero latency. So you go after health records, you go after different weaknesses. Often you're just collecting data, hoping that a couple of different cybersecurity hacks can get you a full piece of data that then allows you to infiltrate. And increasingly we're seeing a lot of software attacks where if you can find your way into a supplier that happens to have EDI into your company, that's a way that you can do cyber attacks at scale. So that's what we're really seeing. Look, I think the reality is every finance function, typically used to have voice verification for a wire transfer. It takes about 5 minutes to replicate somebody's voice if you've got enough recordings on them. You've got a lot of things that are out there. So now we actually have multi-factor authentication along with voice verification for every wire transfer. Palo Alto networks, I think more and more companies will go the same. But I think you're going to see more and more of that. It's a zero trust architecture for everything and anything that you do, just to make sure that you don't have either cybersecurity criminals or increasingly AI actually stepping in and infiltrating your company.
So what would you say would be the 3 key questions that any CFO should be able to ask their cyber team and understand the answer to?
Oh, that's a great question. Look, I think the first question would be, do we have a clearly articulated cyber strategy that has been updated in the last 12 months? It's such a fast-moving industry that what may have been right just 3 years ago is probably not right today. a lot of new technologies, a lot of stitching together. And so if you're a company that has multiple different vendors for different parts of cybersecurity, you probably have some weaknesses that you didn't even realize happens because every vendor has their own policies and procedures. And so you actually have multiple different policies and procedures, and it's the seams between them that I'd be worried about. So the first question would be, do we have an up-to-date cybersecurity strategy that's been validated by a third party? That's question number one. Question number two is, are we spending like at least in proportion with what we think we should? Have we done the benchmarks? Have we like talked to other people? And that's probably the second question that I'd be doing. I think the third question would be, how bad would it be if we're breached, right? Is this going to be catastrophic? Like, would it be complete business interruption? If you're an e-commerce business and your site's down, that's it. Like there's nothing you can do. And just how bad would it be? And have we got insurance for it? Have we got a business continuity plan in case it happens? But I think those are the three questions at a macro level that I would ask.
So if I'm a CFO who wants to learn more about this, maybe I'm coming into it from a completely different industry as you did, what would you recommend that they study up on, or what are the things that they should be turning to, the sources of knowledge that they can learn from to bring themselves up to speed?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. I think you can go two different ways. You can go to the practitioners of cybersecurity, Palo Alto Networks. You can go to the website, look it up, read some of the research papers from Unit 42. There are others that are out there across the industry that are helpful. You can also just reach out to other CFOs. Trust me, any company that's been hacked, the CFO of that company has become an expert in cybersecurity. Chances are, if you're a CFO, you at least know somebody that has been hacked. Just talk to their CFO, you'll learn a lot. And if that doesn't work, feel free to reach out to me.
Dipak Golechha, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Brett.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. Join us again on Cyber Dialogues, brought to you by Palo Alto Networks, as we continue to explore the ever-changing landscape of cyber risk across the Asia Pacific and Japan region.